Hi, this is Nancy. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to start by making my background panel for the card that you saw. We're going to use some Distress Oxide ink in Broken China, and I've selected the new Classy Stripe stencil from Altenew, and I'm going to ink this up using my little dauber. Now normally I would use a circular motion with stencils, but with this particular one, I have to go in very lightly because these are very delicate stripes on this stencil, so they will move around quite easily. So I'm very, very gently touching the paper. Then I'm using an up and down motion that follows the stripes. That was the best way I found to use this stencil. I'm holding the area down, though, very closely with my finger so the stripes aren't moving. Trying to use a little bit of a post-it note to keep from getting all inky. But as I move through there, I just do tiny little circles very lightly, then I come back and I just do an up and down on the stripes. So you can see I've finished that panel up there. And what I want to do is add a little more definition as this dries. So I have selected the Jet Black Altenew ink spray. This one has the matte finish. I'm going to shake it up just a little bit, but there's no mixing balls that you hear like in the metallics. So how I like to use this is take the nozzle completely out, tap the nozzle, and I get these droplets. That's the splatter effect that I like. I'm concentrating it in that upper left corner. I have another plan for the lower right corner, so I don't need to do a lot of coverage at this point all over it. So I'm happy with this. I'm going to set it aside and let it dry. Now I need to stamp the images that I'm going to color because I'm going to be using some Copic coloring, and I want these colors to be in the yellows, and you can see that I'm going to choose a couple of images out of the Garden Treasure stamp set, and I'm also going to put them in with, I'm going to stamp them with Memento gray flannel. I like the softness of the gray flannel, the fact that it is not quite as harsh as black. So we're going to finish that up, and Memento's Copic alcohol ink friendly. So at this point I'm going to color these images, and the flowers are going to be yellow and the leaves are going to be green. And I'm going to start by laying in a layer of Y06. And normally I would do a petal at a time, but on this particular project, because we're going to practice that flicking motion that Laura Basson talked about in the classes that were the Clean, Simple, and Colorful Techniques, I'm going to completely do the petals. I want them to be a little drier because I'm not looking for a blend. I want you to see my flicking motion and the flicks that I'm putting in there. So I'm laying in the base color. There's a few little blossoms down on that cluster, so I'm going to go ahead and color those. Now I can go in with the flicking motion with the Y08. And you can see that I have my pen in a very vertical mode, its stance of vertical. I use the very tip of my pen, and I just flick those in, not laying it down, but it's a laying and flicking and lifting, flicking and lifting. It's probably one of the harder things I find that people have, especially when I teach Copic classes. It's just getting that flick and not totally just laying the marker down. And by letting the first layer dry a little bit, you'll see these flicks. So again, it's using that tip and going in very lightly. I flick up. So again, I think it's important that people find a way that's comfortable for them. So again, it's paper. It can be turned around. So I'm finishing this up, putting a little emphasis on some areas, just dotting in a little bit on those blossoms, and then I can use the green for my leaves. I'm going to start with a G20, then I'm going to add a little bit of G21. Now this particular image on the leaf has a lot of definition already on the image, so your flicking isn't going to be as noticeable on this one, but it was the best image in the set to use. And I'm just going to go ahead again and color it in, and I'm only using these two colors because you're not going to see the flicks as much and with all the dark ink there. So you'll see a little bit, but not as much. So you can see it's actually getting some definition over top of that. So then I'm going to put a little bit of C7 in the centers of those flowers, and I'm going to cut them out. So I'm going to use my Sidekick. I presently do not own the Altenew Mini Blossom. I'm not sure if that's in my future or not, but I'm going to use this little Sidekick to cut these out. I'm going to take the dies and tape them down. I tape most of my dies down just to make sure they don't move. I'm using just a repositionable, removable Scotch tape. I like this a lot. I do also de-tack it so that it's not quite as sticky. You can do that by putting it on your pants, your hands, your shirt, and I keep my tape. I usually just tape at the top of my machine. So now that's all done. We are going to work on another little aspect of the card. I have also die cut a black piece of paper out of that blossom. I want to add some definition to it. So I want to put a little embossed edge on it with some clear embossing powder. So I could do it a couple of different ways, but this blossom has lots of definition. So I could just take my sticky pad and run it around the edges, but that works better if you've got squares, circles, something that's got a little smoother edge. But instead, I'm going to use my Versamark pen that's just got sticky in the pen. It's the same thing. And I'm going to go around these edges and I'm going to lay in that sticky ink. So I'm making sure that it's got good coverage. The paper was absorbing some of it, so I go around it several times to make sure that it's got good coverage. And then what I'm going to do is put clear embossing powder on it. I have a little tub here of embossing powder that's clear because I used so much of it. I'm just going to dip it in where the edges were, and you can see that there's embossing powder around the edges of that. So now what I can do is I can go ahead and use my heat gun and get that all melted. Now as it's melted and it's a little bit warm, I'm dipping it, you can't see it off camera, but I'm dipping it back in there just to lay in a little bit more. This is not a really solid edge on there, but I'm okay with that. I just wanted a little bit of pizzazz there. So as I said earlier, there was something else going to happen down in the lower right corner, and this is a triangle that I've pre-cut, and I want to add some clear embossing stripes to this. So I am going to pull out that classy stripe stencil again, and I'm going to tape down my stencil to my piece of cardstock, and now I am going to use the sticky ink pad, and I am just going to smush it in on top of that stencil. So you should be able to see it as you're doing this, but I'm just going to smush it in, lay it in, and push it down so it's getting some ink through and creating those sticky areas of stripes. Doesn't really work to drag it, but I'm just pushing it in there. Again, this doesn't have to be totally perfect. That's not the look. I just want a tone on tone type of look. So I've got the sticky ink on there. I'm going to take the stencil off, try to pick this up as best I can to not take the ink off, and I'm going to use all of that embossing powder and cover it. Sorry that's off camera a little bit, was sitting up on the corner there. But just putting on the clear embossing powder, making sure I've got the areas covered. And again, this will probably not come out with total like solid stripes, but it's going to give me exactly what I'm looking for. Just a little bit more definition, a little bit of fun activity on that piece of solid black paper. So I've got my heat gun heated up, and I'm going to melt that powder. I'm going to hold that down. It's kind of difficult to hold it without getting burned, so it's moving real fast, but I am getting those shiny stripes that I'm looking for. They show up a little bit on camera. They're not totally visible, but as you can see as I'm going through there, they're developing. Okay? So melted that. Whenever you're embossing, be sure your heat gun is warmed up and ready to go. Now it's time to put the card together. So I have a gray A2 top folding card base, and I'm just going to layer that inked panel there, and then I'm going to put the new embossed black piece down the lower right corner. So I'm going to use some score tape to do this, and just stick it down. It's going to have a little bit of a border, a little edge where you'll see the gray, but when I put the black piece on, I'm going to go directly to the side, so it's going to be offset. So I'm laying in the foam tape because I wanted this to have a little bit more definition on it, and mounting that there. So now I have all the pieces of the blossoms that I want to put together. So I have my little embossed black piece and my flower. I've got several little clusters and a couple of leaves that I had already done. So I'm working on where I want to lay this on the card. I also have a sentiment, the Bloom with Joy, that I've already stamped and embossed with white, and it came from the Peony spray stamp set. And I cut it with a flag shape, and I also did a piece of paper that I totally inked with the Broken China Distress Oxide that I'm going to mount it to. I want that blue accent. So I've got that ready to go. I'm using it as a placer, the marker, to make sure I'm getting everything where I want it to be, and I'm happy building this card. So as I glue all this down and make sure that I'm popping up a couple of pieces, making sure that everything I've got is where I want it to be, getting it positioned, and now I'm happy. So before, when I put that little bit of C7 in the centers of my flowers, my intent is to put these little gems in the centers, so I wanted that to be colored in. So I have some little tiny black gems that I'm just putting in. I usually use the tips of my scissors, a pick. Sometimes I even, use a little craft knife to lay them in there. So as I put those in, it's just an emphasis on the little centers of the flowers. So that pretty much completes the card, and it turned out really fun. I hope you try some of these new techniques, and particularly your flicking technique with your markers, and then look at those new products from Altenew, the stencils, and practice. So have a good day. Thanks for stopping by.